All right, welcome. So thanks for joining, everyone. I'm very happy talking today about one of my favorite problems in working with SQL, and it's called the gaps and island problem. I wanted to start before we dive into the actual SQL code. I wanted to start with the conceptual problem, right? So we'll look at some of the SQL code, but let's start with the concept first. So the gaps and islands problem is really interesting, and what it means basically is you have a series of events. Could be anything from user events, could be IoT data, whatever you want, and what happens is that these events are grouped in some way. So, let's say these are user events, and maybe this part is one group of events. Maybe this was a day or some sort of session that this user had, and then there's another part where maybe it was this one, and maybe some other part, or maybe it was not this one but it was actually these ones, because we want to kind of separate them by time. And so what you can start to see is that actually what happens here is you start to create these little islands in like the larger sea of events, and in between these islands, of these meaningful islands, meaningful to your business, there are these gaps of open spaces. All right, so that's the conceptual problem. I actually see this problem quite often in the clients and the customers that I work with. And maybe as a quick introduction for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dumke de Wild. I am an analytics engineer at Xebia Data. So I work with data and analytics, set up data platforms for customers. Could be anything from wholesale distributors to e-commerce to marketing analytics, web analytics data, banks, all kinds of different customers. And what I think is interesting is that a lot of us often come from this, let's say, web analytics background, and we see this as user events, right? And we think of this as sessions, maybe, if you're familiar with the old kind of Google Analytics way of thinking about this. But it doesn't have to be a single session on a single device. So what if these were like different devices, maybe? Or the other thing that I often see is that, let's say you have different users. So we have, maybe it's, I don't know if there are any parents here, but let's say it's parents using a app for their daycare, basically. So we have a father and a mother, and so maybe these are the different parents that do something at the same time, or it could be a different users from the same company. I've worked with this scenario as well. So it's the same company, and this is user A, and this is user B, and they simultaneously work on a similar project. Let's say it's a to-do app or like a project management app or something like that. And it doesn't make sense to necessarily look at one single user on a single device, because you want to know like what actually happened in the recent, how do you say it, like the recent quarter, or the last half year, the last 7 days or 90 days, whatever metric you're using. And so oftentimes this comes up as a problem. You want to group these things together, these islands together, but the tool that you're using doesn't like to do it. And so that's why we are going into the actual data to make it work to our needs. And so, as you can see here, I am using the GA4 data. Basically, you can use any kind of data set that has events that you want to use. You can combine multiple data sets, especially if you have like customer data from different areas. You maybe want to combine different things to get both the purchases and the web events, something like that. But in this case, we'll keep it simple, start with the GA4 data. And so what I tend to do is I want to have a look um, at the underlying data. A good practice, especially if you're working with web data, is that if you do a select star on all the tables, you will get a lot of data that you're processing. So usually I like to take a sample here and we'll take like 1% to just have a look at what is going on and what kind of data we have, right? And so if you're familiar with this data, you'll see a lot of things that you know, like there's a page view, there's a event timestamp and a date. There's different types of events here. These events have additional information as well. Oops. Uh, there's of course things like a device category. But one of the most important ones, let me look at where it is this is user ID right here. And like I said, right, so this could be any kind of ID that you want to use. We'll use the user ID for now. Or I should say this is the user pseudo ID, but it could be a user ID, it could be a company ID, it could be something that is meaningful to your organization. Of course, we wanted to use this event timestamp as well, because obviously, it being a timeline, we want to have some identification of the time. And we, in this scenario, will use the event name. And so this gives us a pretty good idea of what's going on here. With a smaller set of data, you see that all these different people are basically doing different things. So how do we get to this concept of the different islands that we want to identify, right? So what I like to do is what I think is easy is to just start with something that makes more sense to us as individuals, right? So there's a lot of data in here. So I took a few of these user IDs to kind of sample this a little bit, and so you can get an idea of what one single user is, or two users are doing here. And so they have some page views, they have some scrolls, some user engagement. There's probably some, yeah, like here they've used some items. There's probably some add to cart events, stuff like that. And so now we get to the part where we can actually start modeling the islands in a way that we like it. And so to do that, we use something called window functions, because basically what we need is, let me make this a little bit clearer. So if we order by our event timestamp, and actually let's do it like this. We can start to see that what happens is, for this user, they have two events at exactly the same time, three even probably, and then there's a next event, right? And so what you see is that between this first part, or actually this fourth event and the third event, time has passed. And so to determine, as long as we're doing a time-based gaps and islands problem solving, we need to determine the time that has passed between these two events, basically. And to do that, we have something called a window function in SQL, which basically takes sort of a sliding window, you can think of, and it will look at uh, the um, the window that we select, and compare allows us to compare these windows in between a row. So we're looking at the lag in this case of a event timestamp, and the lag will give us the previous one, so the one row before of the row that we're looking at. But for users in here, we need to partition it as well. So we have to say that it's not just the previous row; it's actually the previous row over the user ID. So basically, we split it up into all the different user IDs that we have, and then for each user ID, we order it by event timestamp, and we look at the previous event, basically. So this will give us the previous event, but actually what we wanted to have was the difference in time, right? So we just subtract the difference from this, and we will get a number from this. Now, this number, what is interesting is that you see indeed these were at the same time, and here we see a lot of time has passed. Interestingly enough, this time is in microseconds, so that is not very meaningful for us. So basically, what we want to do is we want to make it into milliseconds first, and then into seconds, and that way, let's round this off a bit. That way we can get the time in seconds that has passed. Let's see if I did this correctly. I think I need to. I will probably need to combine these first before we divide. All right, and so that gives us a nice kind of identification of how much time has actually passed. So given that we've identified that this time has passed, we can now say, like, hey, if a certain amount of time has passed, then we're basically saying this is a new session. So it could be it could also be that we have a different kind of condition, right? So this is just a time-based condition, but we could also say that we want to have a certain event that causes a new session, or some kind of combination of things that causes a new session. But in this case, we're going to say this is the number of seconds that has passed, and if this number of seconds is more than um, let's say 30 minutes, then we want to do something. We want to say, okay, it's actually a new session, or it's not a new session. And so now what you can see is that indeed, where, for example, here, there's a session start event. So this actually matches up with Google's session definition, right? GA4 session definition as well. Um, but maybe, let's say if this was we have a very like complex e-commerce kind of thing, and we think that people need to think about their purchase for a very long time. So instead of doing 30 minutes, we could also say no, they actually need the entire day to think about what they're doing and maybe go through with their purchase. And so we have a different kind of session definition here. So actually what we're doing here, and I'm gonna let's have a look. So basically what we did here is that we said these are kind of the gaps that we have defined, right? Oops. And so we can define this in our solution here as the gaps, because now we basically say, hey, wherever there is a gap, we identify it with a one. And so this gives us actually quite a neat little trick, because now what we can do is that we can say we can create entire islands by just summing up these ones that we have here, and something magical will start to appear. So I can do a select star. So we select everything from the gaps above. And what we want to do is actually we will call this thing that we identified here as a new session column. And now we want to, for each user, we basically want to sum up the new sessions. Uh, over by pseudo ID, and we order by event timestamp. Am I missing something here? Yes, we want to select star from islands. Let's see, what did I miss? Well, yes. And so actually what you will start to see is that this kind of, we start with the 0, but once we sum this up, we start to get something that looks like a session identifier. And so basically, if now I want to create a session identifier that is unique to every user, basically what I can do is that I can say, hey, I'm going to take this user pseudo ID. I want to combine this with, put something in between. Um, but actually, I want to combine this with our new session identifier. And so this way we can get a unique session ID that we can start to do interesting calculations on. Because what becomes interesting is that now we have the entire session here, we have a unique identifier for that. So that basically means that we can start to do aggregations on those sessions as well. And that's what I think makes it really interesting, is that we can say, hey, I want to take this, let's call this our session ID. I want to take this session ID and I want to do something like, I want to have the session start. And so the session start, since we will start to do a group by, we can basically say we want to take our, we actually need to turn this into a timestamp, which is a timestamp micros, which we'll call DT. And then here we will have that DT. We'll order this by DT. And so now we can do things like get the session and we'll do the min to get the session start. But we can also do very interesting things, like we can count the number of distinct events as unique events. And then, of course, we can count all events. We can even, let's say we want to array aggregate our events to get all the events that took place in this session. And so we select this from our islands. And now we select this from our aggregation. I must miss something here again. I'm gonna cheat here and yes. This is, of course, always what happens in a live demo. And we need to select this. Of course, we need to group this group by session. ID. And so now you see that per session, I get a nice start time, an end time, unique events, total events. I get all the events that took place here. I can even do, if I want to get the time that has passed, I can do a timestamp diff, right? And I can take these same expressions here and I can say I want to have the seconds that passed. So this would be the session time. And you can start to do all these very interesting aggregations. And so one of the things that I like to use this for as well is that, let's say you want to have, I want to compare, for example, the number of items that someone viewed compared to the number of items that were added to cart. Well, this actually makes it quite easy because I want to sum all the items that they viewed. So I'm going to say if the event name, name is view item, then we'll have a 1, and otherwise it's a 0. And then we're going to do the same actually if the event name is a add to cart. This will be num items viewed, and this will be num add to carts, right? And so we just add this up, and we have very extensive data on our sessions. So you can use this for segmenting users. You can use this for doing very in-depth analysis on your page. You can use this for having some kind of ratio that you want to work with. So I think there's a lot of interesting data, and especially, like I said before, right, if you start to combine this not just with your web analytics data, but with other data sources as well, like purchases, I can start to add in like what is the total lifetime value of this customer, or what is the total value of this business that they're part of. So let's say you have a B2B product like the project management tool that I mentioned. We can say like, hey, we have 10 users that that are responsible for like 90% of all the events, and then we have a couple of other users that are responsible for the rest of the events. So you can do all kinds of very interesting things, and that to me is the beauty of this gaps and islands thing. Like if you structure it correctly, like conceptually, maybe it's You have to think about this a little bit the first time, but you can start to structure this in your SQL code to first identify like where are the gaps. Once I've identified the gaps, I can assign the islands basically, and then I can start to do my aggregations on the islands and get all the neat insights that I want. So yeah, that for me is gaps and islands in a little under half an hour. There is a little bit of time for questions if anyone has any. Uh, Otherwise, I uh, can definitely recommend that you will start trying this out. Like I showed you, the GA4 data set is a great way to start. All right, so Timo saying, yeah, you can use any classifier, like start a new session after a purchase. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So anything basically that you have an if statement here, right? It doesn't necessarily even have to be an event timestamp. It could be multiple if statements. So I could say if I don't know, whatever, like a campaign source, if you want to use something like that, is not null. For example, you could do something like this and have that be a session start event as well. So your conditions and classifiers can become very complex. All right. Well, then that's it from my side. I want to thank you all for joining on your busy days, and I hope that you enjoyed this and that you find a use for it in your day-to-day work. Thanks.